As we drove back to Ashbourne, Dr. Johnson recommended to me, as he had often done, to drink water only. Oh, speaking of water, something in my throat. And that is water today. Drink water only. Said Johnson. You are then sure not to get drunk, whereas if you drink wine, you are never sure. Well, that's patently obvious. I said drinking wine was a pleasure which I was unwilling. Why, sir, said he, there is no doubt that not to drink wine is a great deduction from life, but it may be necessary. He, however, owned that in his opinion a free use of wine did not shorten life, and said he would not give less for a life of a certain Scotch lord, whom he named, and who a footnote tells us is Archibald, the 11th Earl of Ingleton, celebrated for hard drinking than for that of a sober man. But stay, said he, with his usual intelligence and accuracy of inquiry. Does it take much wine to make him drunk? I answered, a great deal, either of wine or strong punch. Then, said Johnson, that is the worst. I presume to illustrate my friend's observation thus. Quote, a fortress which soon surrenders has its walls less shattered than when a long and obstinate resistance is made. So that's a good argument for being a lightweight. I ventured to mention a person, also Archibald, who was as violent a Scotsman as he was an Englishman, and literally had the same contempt for an Englishman compared with a Scotsman that he had for a Scotsman compared with an Englishman. And that he would say of Dr. Johnson, damned rascal, to talk as he does so of the Scotch. This seemed for a moment to give him pause. It perhaps presented his extreme prejudice against the Scotch in a point of view somewhat new to him by the effect of contrast. Also, I'd like people to note that the use of literally here is how everybody poo-poos it nowadays. It's an exaggeration, I think. Or maybe I guess he is being... he literally had the same contempt for an Englishman. Is that how you're supposed to use it? I don't know. I'm just pointing it out that it's old use of that phrase. Anyway, by the time when we returned to Ashbourne, Dr. Taylor was gone to bed. Johnson and I sat up a long time by ourselves. He was much diverted with an article which I showed him in the Critical Review of this year, giving an account of a curious publication entitled A Spiritual Diary and Soliloquies by John Ruddy, M.D. Dr. Ruddy was one of the people called Quakers, a physician of some eminence in Dublin and author of several works. This diary, which was kept from 1753 to 1775, the year in which he died, and was now published in 2 volumes octavos, exhibited, in the simplicity of his heart, a minute and honest register of the state of his mind, which, though frequently laughable enough, was not more so than the history of many men would be if recorded with equal fairness. The following specimens were extracted by the reviewers. And these are in quoted marks here. 10th month, 1753. 23, indulgence in bed, an hour too long. 12th month, 17. In the hypochondriac obnubulation from wind and indigestion. Obnubulation. Obnubulation. That's the word he's using. 9th month, 28. An overdose of whiskey. 29. A dull, cross-chloric, sickish day. 1st month, 1757, 22. A little swinish at dinner and repast. 31. Dogged on provocation. 2nd month, 5. Very dogged on, or snappish. 14. Snappish on fasting. 26. Cursed snappishness to those under me on a bodily indisposition. Third month, 11. On a provocation, exercised a dumb resentment for 2 days instead of scolding. 22. Scolded too vehemently. 23. Dogged again. Fourth month, 29. Mechanically and sinfully dogged. Johnson laughed heartily at this good quietist, self-condemning minutes, particularly at his mentioning with such a serious regret occasional instances of swinishness in eating and doggedness of temper. He thought the observations of the critical reviewers upon the importance of a man to himself so ingenious and so well expressed. He thought the observations of the critical reviewer upon the importance of a man to himself so ingenious and so well expressed that I shall here introduce them. After observing that, quote, there are a few writers who have gained any reputation by recording their own actions, they say. So this is, I'm guessing, quoting the critical reviewers. We may reduce the egotists to 4 classes. In the first, we have Julius Caesar. He relates his own transactions, but he relates them with a peculiar grace and dignity, and his narrative is supported by the greatness of his character and achievements. In the second class, we have Marcus Antonius. Antoninus. This writer has given us a series of reflections on his own life, but his sentiments are so noble, his morality so sublime, that his meditations are universally admired. In the third class, we have some others of tolerable credit, who have given importance to their own private history by an intermixture of literary anecdotes and the occurrences of their own times. The celebrated Hutius has published an entertaining volume upon this place, De Robus ad Eum Pertinentibus, on matters that concerned him. In the fourth class, we have the journalists, temporal and spiritual, Elias Ashmole, William Lilly, George Whitefield, John Wesley, and 1,000 other old women and fanatic writers of memoirs and meditations. Back to Boswell. I mentioned to him that Dr. Hugh Blair, in his lecture on Rhetoric and Belles Lettres, which I heard him deliver at Edinburgh, had animadverted on the Johnsonian style as too pompous, and attempted to imitate it by giving a sentence of Addison in The Spectator, number 411, in the matter of Johnson. When treating of this utility of the pleasures of imagination in preserving us from vice, it is observed of those who know not how to be idle and innocent that their very first step out of business is to vice or folly, which Dr. Blair supposed would have been expressed in the Rambler thus: their very first step out of the regions of business is into the perturbation of vice or the vacuity of folly. Footnote here. When Dr. Blair published his lectures, he was invidiously attacked for having omitted his censure on Johnson's style, and on the contrary, praising it highly. But before that time, Johnson's Lives of the Poets had appeared, in which his style was considerably easier than when he wrote The Rambler. It would therefore have been uncandid in Blair, even supposing his criticism to have been just, to have preserved it. Anyway, Johnson said to this, "Sir, these are not the words I would have used. No, sir, the imitators of my style have not hit it. Miss Aiken has done it the best, for she has imitated the sentiment as well as the diction. I intend, before this work is concluded, to specimens of imitation of my friend's style in various modes, some caricaturing or mimicking it, and some formed upon it, whether intentionally or with a degree of similarity to it, of which perhaps the writers were not conscious." It says, see page 1370. Well, we haven't got there yet, so you're just going to have to hold on until we're on page 1370. In Baretti's review, which he published in Italy under the title of Frusta Letteraria, it is observed that Dr. Robertson, the historian, had formed his style upon that of Il Celebre Samuele Johnson, My friend himself was of that opinion, for he once said to me in a pleasant manner, "Sir, if Robertson's style be faulty, he owes it to me. That is, having too many words, and those too big ones." I read to him a letter which Lord Monboddo had written to me containing some critical remarks upon the style of his Journey to the Western Islands of Scotland. His lordship praised a very fine passage upon landing at Ickhamkill, but his own style being exceedingly dry and hard, he disapproved of the richness of Johnson's language and of his frequent use of metaphorical expressions. Johnson answered, "Why, sir, this criticism would be just if in my style superfluous words or words too big for the thoughts could be pointed out. But this I do not believe can be done. For instance, in the passage which Lord Monboddo admires, quote, 'We were now treading that illustrious region,' unquote, the word illustrious contributes nothing to the mere narration, for the fact might be told without it. But it is not therefore superfluous, for if it wakes the mind to peculiar attention where something of more than usual importance is to be presented. Illustrious for what?" And then the sentence proceeds to expand that circumstance connection with Iona. "And, sir, as to metamorphical expression, that is a great excellence in style, when it is used with propriety, for it gives you two ideas for one, conveys the meaning more luminously and generally with a perception of delight." Footnote here about the landing of Ickhamkill. I guess it's this is a quoting from that book Johnson wrote, the book Journey to the Western Islands of Scotland. "We were now treading that illustrious island," Johnson was just talking about that, "which was once the luminary of the Caledonian regions, whence savage clans and roving barbarians derived the benefits of knowledge and the blessings of religion. To abstract the mind from all local emotion would be impossible if it were endeavored, and would be foolish if it were possible. Whatever withdraws us from the power of our senses, whatever makes the past, the distant, or the future predominate over the present, advances us in the dignity of thinking beings. Far from me and far from my friends be such frigid philosophy as may conduct us, indifferent and unmoved, over any ground which has been dignified by wisdom, bravery, or virtue. The man is little to be envied whose patriotism would not gain force upon the plain of Marathon, or whose piety would not grow warmer among the ruins of Iona." Boswell here. "Had our tour produced nothing else but this sublime passage, the world must have acknowledged that it was not made in vain. Sir Joshua Banks, the present respectable president of the Royal Society, told me he was so much struck on reading it that he clasped his hands together and remained for some time in an attitude of silent admiration." It's not a bad little passage. Okay. Johnson told me that he had been asked to undertake the new edition of the Biographia Britannica, but had declined it, which he afterwards said to me he regretted. In this regret, many will join, because it would have procured us more of Johnson's most delightful species of writing. And although my friend Dr. Kipps has hitherto discharged the task judiciously, distinctly, and with more impartiality than might have been expected from a separatist, it were to have been wished that the superintendence of this literary temple of fame had been assigned to a friend to the Constitution in Church and State. We should not then have had it too much crowded with obscure dissenting teachers, doubtless men of merit and worth, but not quite to be numbered amongst the most eminent persons who had flourished in Great Britain and Ireland. In this censure, which has been carelessly uttered, I carelessly joined. Okay. On Saturday, September 20th, after breakfast, when Taylor was gone to his farm, Dr. Johnson and I had a serious conversation by ourselves on melancholy and madness, which he was, I always thought, erroneously inclined to confound together. Melancholy, like great wit, may be near allied to madness, but there is, in my opinion, a distinct separation between them. When he talked of madness, he was to be understood as speaking of those who were in any great degree disturbed, or as it is commonly expressed, troubled in mind. Some of the ancient philosophers held that all deviations from right reason were madness, and whoever wished to see the opinions both of ancients and moderns upon this subject, collected and illustrated with a variety of curious facts, may read Dr. Arnold's very entertaining work. That is Observations on Insanity by Thomas Arnold, MD, London, 1782. Unfortunately, I have to stop here because I realized that footnote from the last page was continued on over onto this page, so I have to go back. So that footnote, you'll recall, was we're talking about Biographia Britannica. Dr. Kipp took over. Johnson didn't do it. And he had a lot of obscure people in it, and not the most eminent persons who had flourished in Great Britain and Ireland, necessarily. And then Boswell added in this censure, which had been carelessly uttered, I carelessly joined. And then I thought that was the end of the footnote, and I thought, well, that's weird. Why did he just put that in there? Well, it turns out he put that in there because the footnote was continued on to the next page, and it's quite a long one. So I simply must read it. It's very long. So here we go. He's now going to be defending Dr. Kippis for way too long. But in justice to Dr. Kippis, who, with that manly, candid good temper which marks his character, set me right, I now with pleasure retract it, and I desire it may be particularly observed, as pointed out by him to me, that the new Lives of Dissenting Divines, in the first 4 volumes of the second edition of the Biographia Britannica, are those of John Abernethy, Thomas Amory, George Benson, Hugh Broughton, the learned Puritan, Simon Brown, Joseph Boys of Dublin, Thomas Cartwright, the learned Puritan, and Samuel Chandler. The only doubt I have ever heard suggested is whether they should have been an article on Dr. Amory. But I was convinced that I am still convinced that he was entitled to one from the reality of his learning and the excellent and candid nature of his practical writings. The new lives of clergymen of the Church of England in the same 4 volumes are as follows. You'll be excited to hear. John Belguy, Edward Beltham, George Barclay, Bishop of Cloyne, William Berryman, Thomas Birch, William Borlass, Thomas Bott, James Bradley, Thomas Broughton, John Brown, John Burton, Joseph Butler, Bishop of Durham, Thomas Cart, Edmund Castell, Edmund Chisel, Charles Churchill, William Clark, Robert Clayton, Bishop of Clogher, John Conybeare, Bishop of Bristol, George Costard, and Samuel Croxall. I am not conscious, says Dr. Kippis, of any particularly in conducting the work. Of any partiality in conducting the work, rather. I would not willingly insert a dissenter minister that does not justly deserve to be noticed, or omit an established clergyman that does. At the same time, I shall not be deterred from introducing dissenters into the Biographia, when I am satisfied that they are entitled to that distinction from their writing, learning, and merit. This is Boswell now. Let me add that the expression, a friend to the Constitution in Church and State, was not meant by me as any reflection upon the reverend gentleman, as if he were an enemy to the political constitution of his country, as established at the Revolution, but from my steady and avowed predilection for a Tory, was quoted from Johnson's dictionary, where that distinction is so defined. Okay, so we're ending there with Boswell covering his ass so he doesn't get sued, I guess. Well, until next time, bye from Boswell. All's well that bends.